Jackson Deere meant to those of us who stood on the stage, but mostly we sat in those seats to learn from Margaret Walker Alexander, to hear Dr. Jacobs Reddix on occasions like this say, "This is indeed an auspicious occasion, and you should be proud to be here." And we are proud to have you because it is indeed an auspicious occasion. We celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander, and right now, the nobleness of a person who walked with, treaded with, faced danger with Dr. Martin Luther King, none other than Ambassador Andrew Young. I commented last night to Dr. Mason that when I was here, we didn't have the choices that many of the students have today. The teacher said, "You're going to a convocation." And we were at the convocation because someone was checking our seats. But now, and he said, "Well, it's a new day." And I got that aha minute knowing that yes, it is a new day. But on this new day, I ask you to recognize some of us are still in the old day and have not truly entered that instant age of communication. Most of you want to text, you want to tweet, you want to email, you want to have Bluetooths, cell phones, and all iPods and all other kinds of new technology glued to your ears and eyes. I ask you this morning to take just a minute and turn off your iPods, turn off your telephones and cell phones, and I think we're going to have a wonderful experience for you this morning. So we're now ready to begin the program, and the program will follow as printed. Mr. Banks is going to begin for us.
Good morning. At the request of Ambassador Young, who stood down from the balcony at the Lorraine Hotel when Dr. Martin Luther King was shot. He and Jesse Jackson was there. We're going to ask all the clergy persons who are here to please stand very quickly. Clergy persons, men, women, bishops. If you could take just 1 minute and just come right down and put your hands together, left over right, and everybody else will follow us after you have done that. Brother Perkins, all the clergy persons. This is how the movement was being held once he was shot, and Ambassador was right there. Hands left over right, and once you have made that, and turn to the audience, please. Turn to the audience, thank you. Now all the rest of us, please stand together and put hands left over right. And if we have no music, we're going to do like we did before. We would sing this song, and we would just do some stanzas that we should overcome. And instead of singing at the end, we're going to sing at the beginning. This is our gathering call. Ambassador. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. set us free. The truth shall make 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 us free today. The truth shall make us free today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. I do believe. The truth shall make us free today. The truth shall make us free today.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and join me in the litany. We thank thee, O God, for the life of Martin Luther King, Jr., for the inspiration he gave those around him, for the legacy he bequeathed to our nation and the world. We thank thee, O God. For those who walked with him, those who followed him, and those who led in smaller spheres to create a new age of hope and unity. We thank thee, O Lord. For those who came before and after, for those who struggled against oppression and exploitation, for those whose dreams Martin articulated. We thank thee, O God. For those who stood in the way, tempting us in our indifference, reinforcing our passion for freedom. We thank thee, O Lord. For those who served, for those who prayed, for those who sang, for those who marched, for those who bled, for those who died. We thank you, O God. For the seers of visions, the doers of deeds, for those who stayed home, for those who followed the stars. We thank you, O Lord. On this, the birthday of Martin Luther King, Jr., we celebrate his life and the memory of those unnamed and unfamed who left their marks on the pages of our lives. Unite us, O Father, in the spirit of love as we rededicate our lives to the task of creating a world of togetherness, peace, and goodwill. Amen. May I take a special privilege and ask all of you to honor a great teacher, a great writer who was trained and educated and spent most of her livelihood working here in Jackson Public Schools and at Jackson State University. And she composed this, and I think that deserves a round of applause for Ms. Marina White. Jackson State is the star so far as urban education is concerned for the city of Jackson. We are that bright gleam for the future. And to come and bring greetings from the city of Jackson is Mr. Sean Perkins, Special Assistant to Mayor Harvey Johnson.
Good morning. On behalf of the City of Jackson and Mayor Harvey Johnson, Jr., it is my great pleasure to welcome each of you to the Jackson State University Martin Luther King Convocation. I'm especially pleased to be here this morning as we welcome Ambassador Andrew Young to our city and to this event this morning. Ambassador Young, your unyielding commitment to civil rights and your lifelong example of grace, steadfast determination, and service to the public are truly inspirational for us all. I applaud Jackson State University, and especially the faculty and the staff of the Margaret Walker Alexander National Research Center, for the vitally important work that begins here in Jackson and so often resonates across our nation. We are truly blessed to have Jackson State University and the Research Center here to celebrate, and explore the rich heritage of the African American culture. The work that the Research Center does creates understanding, initiates dialogue, and helps us understand our contributions. Jackson State University is well known as a leading educational institution that produces a high ratio of African American graduates, especially those attending graduate school. In fact, I happen to have gone to graduate school here. I hope that each of you will feel the same sense of pride and accomplishment that I feel after having studied at this fine institution. I know that nearly everywhere I travel across the nation, the words Jackson State University will be recognized as others as a university that prepares its students for real-world experiences and lays a solid foundation for success. I hope as you proceed with the remainder of the spring semester, students, that each of you will make the commitment to study hard, to get involved in your campus community, and even the City of Jackson community, and that you will make time for community service. There is always a need. There is always a need for great student volunteers through many of our community-oriented nonprofits and other organizations. Again, I welcome each of you today on behalf of Mayor Harvey Johnson, Jr. I celebrate Jackson State University, and I thank Ambassador Andrew Young for taking the time out to come to our capital city and our great institution of higher learning, Jackson State University. Thank you, and God bless you.
University in the largest metropolitan area and capital city of the state of Mississippi, with Mississippi's capital university. I'd also like to recognize the President Emeritus of Jackson State University, Dr. John Peoples, and his wife, Mary. And then finally, I'd like to honor our honored guest, Ambassador Andrew Young. You'll hear a formal introduction, but I thought I'd mention one specific claim to fame that he has, and that is that he is a fellow New Orleanian. And in fact, as a young man, his father was my dentist on the same street that I lived on. So of all the other things that he's famous for, I think that's probably the top on the list. Thank you all for coming, and I think we're going to have a great program.
Mr. President, let's do it. On behalf of the Jackson State University National Alumni Association, welcome. And I bring you greetings. I also want to say greetings because our alumni recognize the great contribution that Dr. King made, which is empowerment and enablement. They may be synonymous in some people's mindsets, but with us it goes like this. If there were no Dr. King, there would be no Pell Grants. There would be no free and reduced meals available throughout the Mississippi Delta. All right, I want to get that straight. So our alumni have greatly benefited from Dr. King's legacy. And in many ways, we are committed to carrying it on, extending it, expanding upon it, and making sure that our progeny would recognize and benefit as well. Furthermore, I want to bring greetings on behalf of our pre-alumni, since a representative per se is not listed to bring greetings. Those students who are situated here, some against their will, but in their best and better interest. Those are not synonymous. So we bring you greetings on this particular occasion. Finally, I want to bring you greetings on behalf of the people of Marks, Mississippi, who participated in the 1968 mule train from Marks, Mississippi to Washington, D.C. as part of the Poor People's Campaign. That may not mean anything to most of you, so you'll listen intently for 1 minute and you will be made aware that Dr. King had planned a mule train from Mississippi to Washington, D.C. as the centerpiece for the Poor People's Campaign. As all of us are well aware, Dr. King was assassinated on April 4th, and the mule train departed Marks on May 14th. One of the driving forces behind the mule train was the Ambassador Andrew Young. In his book, An Uneasy Burden, he makes mention of it. The copies are available in our library. Also, his daughter wrote her master's thesis on the mule train. And she has a picture of her daddy, in many cases, riding a mule when the mule train made it to Atlanta. And what you may not know, but I want you to know, is that I wrote a book on the mule train that's available in our bookstore. The ambassador, I keep calling him the doctor, gave me an autographed copy of his book in Atlanta several years ago, An Uneasy Burden. Today at lunch, he will get a copy of my book, autographed by yours truly. So today we bring you greetings on behalf of the alumni, our pre-alumni, and of course the proponents, the coordinators, and the participants of the mule train from Marks, Mississippi to Washington, D.C. that left Marks on May 14, 1968 and went down Pennsylvania Avenue on June 19, 1968. Greetings, greetings, greetings.
Good morning.
Good morning.
No, I'm not Michael Morris. But as chair of the public program events at the Margaret Walker National Research Center, Margaret Walker Alexander National Research Center, I'm here to bring occasion on this 41st birthday convocation in memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man for all nations. And this particular convocation is very, very special. The Margaret Walker Alexander National Research Center here at Jackson State University demonstrates its commitment to an effort launched at here under the auspices of the center's founder and director, Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander. And at that time, it was called the Institute for the Study of the History and Culture of Black People. That was 17 years now before the signing of the bill into law declaring the third Monday of January a national holiday to celebrate this man's birthday and legacy. This month is not January though. This day is not the third Monday, nor is it the Friday before the third Monday. But we are here today to celebrate the life and legacy of a man whose kind walked the earth once in a millennium, as the late Dr. Benjamin Mays referred to Dr. King's eminence. Lest we forget, Dr. King the dreamer, the conscious of his generation and the nation, a man of peace. And in the words of Margaret Walker Alexander from her poem, 5 Black Men and 10 Will Save the City, the king is dead. Long live the king. He gave us more than life. And if they ask you why he came, tell them he came to wake the conscienceless. Tell them he came to teach us how to dream. The king is dead. Long live the king. A man of peace is immortal beyond the price of segregation. Today's convocation is also special because this year's federal holiday, the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Holiday 2010, was proclaimed by America's first African-American president, the president of these great United States of America, Barack Obama, whose proclamation quotes Dr. King's words on the eve of his death. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. Today's birthday convocation is more of a special because the center was fortunate to reschedule the event
during the month of February, African American History Month, with the same eminent speaker who throughout his life and career has fought for the spirit of compassion and creation of equal opportunity that Dr. King embodied. And as others say, he has rung up some very, very firsts in the fulfillment of Dr. King's dream. Yes, Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander, the king is dead. Long live the king. He gave us more than life. A man of peace is immortal beyond the price of segregation. Happy belated birthday, Dr. King, and thank you. We will always love, respect, and cherish your legacy.
Here again, I'll use that privilege to introduce Miss Rosia Chrysler. And I do that in tribute to Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander. One very popular song says, "Let the work I've done speak for me." And as you listen to Dr. Melina Dow, to Ms. Rosia Chrysler, they are works of Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander. In fact, Rosia Chrysler was the organizers of the Daughters of Margaret, keeping alive the poetry of Dr. Alexander. So we are very pleased to have her do the occasion this morning, and she serves on the board. Now we are ready to go into what Margaret would probably call that prophet's stage, because she always talked about men being prophets, because we've come to Mr. Owen Brooks, who will introduce Ambassador Andrew Young. And just to quote a little poem that Margaret put this in perspective, she talks about Amos. And sometimes ask yourself, are there prophets among you? Margaret Walker said, from Montgomery to Memphis he marches. He stands on the threshold of tomorrow. He breaks the bars of iron, and they remove the signs. He opens the gates of our prison. He speaks to the captive hearts of America. He bears raw their conscience. He is a man of peace for the people. Amos is a prophet of the Lord. Amos speaks through eternity, the glorious word of the Lord. So now we go into a phase we can call listening to the prophet speaks. And Mr. Brooks will come forth, and then the ambassador.
Thank you all for bearing with me. I wasn't always as lame and crippled as I am today, but this is where it's left me. I have a distinct pleasure this morning in introducing our guest speaker, because he is not only a noteworthy person in the area of civil rights, justice, religion, a lot of different areas, but he is, to me, first of all, a personal friend. I have known Ambassador Young, Reverend Young, Congressman Young, Mayor Young, and I could call him a lot of other things too. But his good works have, in fact, gone before him. And I won't take up the time this morning to recount all of the good things that he has done. I just say to you that the world is a better place for having had a person like Dr. Martin Luther King, Mayor Andrew Young, and there are others that are in that number. So without any further delay, let me bring to you this morning my friend, and your honored guest, Ambassador Andrew Young. Thank you.
It's really and truly a pleasure to be here. And I know I'm here for a Martin Luther King occasion, but I can't help but remember that one of the reasons I was able to hook up with Martin Luther King was that in high school they made me learn Margaret Walker. And so it's very appropriate for us to take this time to celebrate their ministries, their missions, and to realize how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. I want to divide this briefly into past, present, and future, because I can't come to Mississippi without remembering that I first came here to see Aaron Henry and Miss Vera Piggy, and they sent me down to Cleveland to see Amzie Moore. And Amzie Moore took me over to Ruleville to meet Fannie Lou Hamer and James Bevel and his family in Itta and the students who were gathered together in Greenville. And Mississippi has always been, for me, an important center of what is and can happen, not only in America, but in the world. Martin Luther King had a great deal of success in Alabama and in Georgia, but it was Mississippi, unfortunately, that led to his death. People say it was his involvement in the war in Vietnam, but more so, it was his visit to Marks, Mississippi. Because when SCLC was founded, we committed to redeem the soul of America from the triple evils of racism, war, and poverty. And we were making progress on racism. We were breaking down those dividing walls, those legal dividing walls of hostility. And we were making progress in challenging the wars that were emerging in Korea and Vietnam. And though they were wars, and though we still have wars, there has been no war of the magnitude of the Second World War or the First World War. There's been no war as bloody in America as the Civil War. And we're getting there, but when we took on the whole question of poverty, when he went to Marks, Mississippi, and for the first time had tears in his eyes at the thought of the poor, and when he decided that we were going to Washington with Marion Wright Edelman, and we were going to make an appeal to the government to put an end to poverty in America, that there was no reason for people to be isolated on lonely islands of poverty in the midst of this ocean of material wealth, he said. And it was in challenging America on its approach to the poor, and the fact that Washington knew that we had the capacity to tie up the nation's capital just as we had tied up Birmingham, just as we had tied up Selma to Alabama, Selma to Montgomery, just as we had been able to tie up Mississippi from Memphis down to Jackson. And Washington, D.C., with 5,000 trained demonstrators, could not continue to function. And I'm convinced that that's what led to his death. But it didn't put a stop to what we were trying to do. And people carried on. The children of Fannie Lou Hamer, the children of Mr. Steptoe. And I don't know whether young people know who those names are even. I don't know whether they know that down in Mississippi in Cleveland, shortly after the Emmett Till murder, when the Klan came to see, to the post office where Amzie Moore were working. They came to say, where is that nigger Amzie Moore? And the people in the post office, most of whom were white, said, Amzie, the Klan is coming for you. Run out the back door, you can make it. Amzie turned around and walked out the front door and said, may I help you, sir? We're looking for that nigger Amzie Moore. I'm Mr. Moore, may I help you? And they turned around and walked away because he fearlessly confronted them with the values that he had inherited from the NAACP. And Mr. Steptoe took a group of people in a wagon in the mid-county, driven by a mule, and they went to the sheriff's office, and they got out, and he went up on the steps of the Capitol with about 4 people, and the sheriff came out and said, what do you want, boy? And Mr. Steptoe said, I'm here to register to vote. He wasn't correct in his pronunciation, but the moral power of his conviction took the sheriff aback. And the sheriff pulled his gun and put it right in the middle of his head, his forehead, and pulled the hammer back and said, what did you say, boy? He said, if I live, I aims to be a reddish voter. And it was that kind of courage. When we took Miss Fannie Lou Hamer over to Georgia, and she decided she was going to take the lead in teaching people how to read and write to register to vote, when she came back, after living on this plantation and being the timekeeper for almost 13 years, when they heard that she'd gone to a voter registration meeting, they moved all of her stuff off the plantation and put it out on the highway. And she never flinched. She never looked back. She simply said, look, I don't care what you do to me. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And she was beaten. She was abused. She was threatened. But she never ceased to inspire not only the students and young people of Mississippi, but she inspired the nation and the world at the 1964 Democratic Convention. And you come from a historic epoch of change that you have to know and you have to remember. When I went to the White House with Jimmy Carter as ambassador to the United Nations, I was very impressed as I walked through the White House and I saw all of these fine young black people, all tall, slender, good-looking, and except that I noticed one thing, they didn't smile much. And I'd walk by them and they would be so busy and so important that they wouldn't speak to me. I said, wait a minute here. And I went to the president and I said, Mr. President, you got a whole lot of folk in this place that don't know how they got here. I'd like to have a meeting with all of the young people, black and white, because Jimmy Carter knew that if it hadn't been for Martin Luther King, he never could have gotten to be president. If it hadn't been for Benjamin Mays and Daddy King and Coretta, he never would have been able to be the governor of Georgia. That people like Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton were liberated, and they made true what Frederick Douglass had said centuries before, that the struggle for freedom is a struggle to save black men's bodies and white men's souls. And we were able to bring up the best of the South. And the best of the South was able to give leadership to this nation, particularly on the questions of race and a little bit on poverty. Lyndon Johnson knew about poverty. Bill Clinton knew about poverty. Both of them had been born poor. Jimmy Carter knew about poverty and race. He had been born in a county that was 80% black. And so you didn't have to teach him anything. You didn't have to tell him. He had lived the same life that we'd lived, only he'd been with a white skin and ours was black. But we had a soul and a mind that was very much in accord. And so we were able to get things done that people immediately began to ridicule. And so the past on which our lives have been built is something that we need to remember because it might be coming to an end. Now let me talk a little bit about the present. You know that there was a period of Reconstruction, that there was a period of Reconstruction after the Civil War where there were senators and congressmen from Mississippi. But by the end of the 18th century, 19th century, all of those men had been picked off one by one, and they had been dismissed from their legislative and gubernatorial positions. We have seen black mayors rise up in the 70s, and there's not a single black mayor, not one, in all of the cities of the United States of America that has not at some time been indicted or been charged with something or other. Even I was called before a grand jury and attempted to defame everything I was trying to do. Most of our young men and women who are in politics, Shirley Franklin they couldn't find anything on her, so they went after our husband and our children. The same intimidation and threats that put an end to Reconstruction are beginning to operate now. I became mayor of Atlanta not because I wanted to be mayor, but because Atlanta had gotten so messed up that the powers that be decided that, well, we'll let the coloreds have it one time, and then we'll take it back. And so Maynard Jackson was mayor, and he turned the city around, but they didn't like the way that it was turning, because he would not do any city business without a black person being on every contract. 25% of every contract issued by the city of Atlanta had to have a minority partner. And sometimes it was 25% black, but sometimes black folk got the contract and they had to have 25% white. We really made integration work in Atlanta. That's the reason you see the progress we've made. But even the people who were liberal and visionary and who thought themselves free of race didn't want that to be. They wanted to have a nice, friendly association of colored and white. But they weren't talking about integrating the money. They weren't talking about really sharing the power. And we made an effort to really share the power and to share the money, not with ourselves, but with others who were less fortunate. For the first time, women got contracts from the city government. No women, white or black, had ever gotten a city contract until Maynard Jackson became mayor. But then they decided they were through with that. And so when I came back from the UN, I've been a congressman, I've been in the civil rights movement. I didn't have a pension from the Congress. I was broke. And I had 3 children about ready to go to college. And so I said, I'm sorry, I'm through with politics. But the liberal white business community in Atlanta had put up a $2 million campaign fund for anybody white who wanted to run for mayor. Now at that time, we were spending $200,000 and $300,000 on a mayor's race. But they wanted to have a white mayor so bad, and they weren't bad people. But they said Cleveland had black mayors, and it started going down. Newark had a black mayor, and it started going down. Detroit wasn't going anywhere. And they didn't want Atlanta to follow in that tradition. It was the same old stereotyping, all black folk alike. And they had supported me for Congress. But I really didn't think I could be mayor. I didn't think it was fair to my family, but my family was more than Jean and my 4 children. My family was the senior citizens and the poor. And there was an 80-year-old lady who came into the meeting where we were discussing who was going to be mayor. And it was understood that I was not running for mayor. And she stood up on her cane, and she shook her cane in my face, and she said, "Look here, boy." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, when you came here, you wasn't nothing. She said, we made you somebody. And I said, well, Martin Luther King made me somebody. She said, who you think made him? We made him too. And now you done been to the Congress, you've been all over the world as ambassador, and when we need you to take over the city and lead the city, you tell us you got to take care of your family. We done wasted our time on you. And she turned around and hobbled out of the meeting. Well, only thing I could do was run for mayor. And because she saw very clearly that it was the intentions of the best white people in Atlanta that we have one black mayor, and then they take it over. We were able to get 2 black mayors. And I was able to defy everything that they were trying to do, that they thought was going to happen. Investment didn't dry up. I'd been to the United Nations. So we brought in money from all over the world. We brought in $70 billion of private investment. We got 1,100 new companies to move into Atlanta. We created 1 million new jobs. And we set up Atlanta to bring the Olympics. And we took Maynard's 25% rule and we made it 35 or 40%. And when the white people complained, I said, wait a minute. Let's look at the math. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, let's just take the Olympics. The Olympics is a $2 billion project that we're running. And we've insisted that black people get 40% of all of the work of the Olympics. And they said, yeah. And I said, we actually got 41, sometimes 42%. But that's 800 million out of 2 billion. But don't you realize that because we were fair with $2 billion worth of money that we control for the city, we've had no black and white conflict here. We've had crime going down. We've had education going up. We've had people working together as brothers and sisters rather than perishing together as fools, as Martin Luther King warned us. And don't you realize that the $2 billion that we brought in for the Olympics has brought in another $5 or $6 billion every year we've been working on the Olympics? And that's private money. Black people are lucky to get 5% of that money, and you got 95% of the money. Now think for a minute. If you start arguing about us getting 40% of $2 billion, you're going to lose the $6 billion that you're getting 95% of. Well, you know, black and white is much less significant than green. And if you can get people to stop thinking black and white and start thinking green, it's amazing how brotherly we can become. And so that's where we were. But then something happened. Something happened and the economy began to change. And the nation and the world got as messed up as the cities were in the 60s and 70s. And so somebody decided we were going to have this one smart, intelligent black man. And we were going to let him take on all of these problems and do everything we can to keep him from being able to solve them. But when he messes up, then we can take back the country for 20 years and change it any way we want to change it. Listen. Now, healthcare is not about health. Healthcare is about defeating Obama and making him a one-term president. Everybody needs healthcare. And I was saying, instead of criticizing Obama, let's realize that John Kennedy wouldn't have been a great president if Mississippi and the Freedom Riders hadn't made him. It was Mississippi and the Freedom Riders that educated the Kennedys. It was Birmingham that sort of brought it into a civil rights bill. And John Kennedy goes down in history as a great president largely because he responded to conditions that we were set up by us. We didn't get along too well with Mississippi in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party because we were older and we made a pragmatic decision that there was a difference between Johnson and Goldwater. And there was. But Lyndon Johnson, even though he passed the '64 Civil Rights Act and Martin Luther King won the Nobel Prize, when we came back from the Nobel Prize, he was afraid to meet with us. He sent us over to the U.S. Attorney General's office. And Hubert Humphrey came over there to meet with us. And then when it got late at night and all the press had gone, then he said, we got a call from President Johnson. He's got some time. Will we bring Dr. King over? And when we went over to see him in the dark of night when there was no press there, he sat down and he told us that he was sorry. But he could not get a voting rights bill introduced in Congress. And he had all of the political reasons why it couldn't pass and why it would disrupt everything else that was going on. And we never said a word. We listened and we thanked the president for his time. And as soon as we walked out of the White House, Martin said, well, I reckon we'll have to help President have the power. And it wasn't a week before we got home when Amelia Boynton and Reverend Fred Reese came over from Selma and said, Martin, you all have to come over here and help us with Selma. That was the middle of December. We said, okay, we'll come over right after Christmas on the NAACP Emancipation Day program, which because it was on a Sunday and Martin and Ralph and nobody wanted to miss church, we changed it to the 2nd and made it Monday night. But to have a meeting in a church, even for the NAACP emancipation, was illegal in Selma. And we could have all gone to jail just for having a church meeting. But we went. And we changed the world in which we lived. And 3 months later, after Bloody Sunday, which coming up on the 7th of March, we ended up having a civil rights bill introduced, and the same Lyndon Johnson that told us he was powerless ended his speech by saying, and we shall overcome. And we got a Voting Rights Act passed by all of us. I'm saying that even in the present, a president doesn't have the power. The people have to rally to give him the power. Now nobody is rallying but these Tea Party folk. But the mistake they make is the Tea Party was complaining about paying taxes to England, to a foreign occupying government. Amen. These Tea Party folk don't want to pay taxes to themselves. They are a freeloading party. They got the grants from the government through the land grant colleges. They got the money to build the suburbs from the government. They got the new opportunities to start businesses, the GI Bill, the FHA, and all of the things that help them build the suburbs on subsidized loans. And now that they've got theirs, they feel pretty comfortable. They want to shut the door. Big government is good for rich folk. It's just that big government shouldn't help poor folk. Now that's sin. It's ignorant, it's selfish, and a nation that lives that way will soon go to hell. So somebody has to call out, not complain about why Barack Obama's not doing this, that, and the other, and he should be something, you know, he's the smartest, he's one of the wisest, he's one of the most disciplined presidents we've ever had since Jefferson Franklin. I mean, since Thomas Jefferson. And you have to remember that the Republicans were against Thomas Jefferson buying Louisiana. He bought Louisiana, the Louisiana Purchase, for $73,000. Everything from New Orleans all the way up almost to the Minnesota border for $73,000. And the Republicans in New England were talking about this being a waste of money and big government spending. Well, Thomas Jefferson understood what was happening in the world. And if he hadn't bought Louisiana from the French were planning to make everything west of the Mississippi a French colony. And let me just take a brief aside and say that the reason he could buy Louisiana from the French was when Napoleon tried to stage his troops to launch an attack on New Orleans. He made a mistake of launching his troops from the island of Haiti. And he hooked up there with a big, smart black brother by the name of Toussaint Louverture. And Toussaint Louverture kicked his butt and sent him back to France. And it was because of Toussaint Louverture that Napoleon never invaded Louisiana. And so we as a nation owe a debt to Haiti that we have never even known or thought about repaying. But now may be the time for us to think about repaying. Now let me move on quickly to the future, because how you got here is not going to remain the same. While you have been asleep, while you have been paying your credit cards and building your bigger houses and buying your wonderful cars, they have behind the scenes been manipulating the legal structure. We were able to win in the civil rights movement because we were able to get decent judges appointed on the Supreme Court and throughout the Court of Appeals across the South. The Fifth Circuit was one of the most reasonable and liberal courts in the whole nation. That's not true anymore. The Bushes have filled most of the seats on the Court of Appeals. The Bushes have stacked the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court doesn't decide now like it did in '54. It's a completely different Supreme Court. And if Barack Obama doesn't have an opportunity to appoint some more judges and help us balance that court, we have already come to an end to Reconstruction. But that's not where the problem is, finally. The problem is economics. And I've been saying to young people, I had about 10 young people call on me and want me to write recommendations to them to law school. And I said, I write recommendations for everybody. But I said, now is not the time for brilliant young men and women to be going to law school. I said, come talk to me for a minute. Let me read to you what's going on. In 1940, the right thing to do was for Thurgood Marshall, Spotswood Robinson, James Hastie, and Houston and others to get together at Howard University and create a team of brilliance that learned the law of the land and learned how to modify and challenge that law so that it had meaning to us. It was not intended for us, but they changed the laws so that they would have meaning for those who had been slaves. But we've done that insofar as we can. But there's another battle, and we understood that if you're in democracy without the right to vote, you're a slave. But now that we've got the right to vote, we realize that we're also in a system of capitalism and free enterprise, and we do not have access to capital. Even in Atlanta, in my neighborhood, where most of the college professors and everybody else lives, the banks had redlined my community. You could have a PhD from Harvard or Yale or anywhere else. They wouldn't give you money to renovate your house if you lived in my neighborhood. We had to challenge the economic power of Atlanta before we were able to begin to break free. But now, the issues that face the world are all economic. We have gotten from the place where anything that helps the poor is socialism. But when you bail out the banks, when you bail out the insurance companies, when you bail out General Motors, that ain't socialism. The hell it ain't. That's socialism for the rich and poverty for the poor. And I'm challenging young men and women, don't go to law school and end up dealing with divorces and arguments over children and their property, all of which are economically rooted. We have to get some of our brain power to do for global economics. See, Barack Obama honestly is really trying to rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic. This global economy is going down. It's not just going down. We owe more money to China. But China isn't paying its own debts. China isn't running financially right. This whole house of cards could collapse unless somebody restructures an economy so that it can be fair to rich and poor alike, so that Europe won't have an advantage over Africa, Canada and the US over Latin America. Somehow we've got to do with the economic order of the world what Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP did with the political order of the United States. So the challenge to the future in a place like Jackson State, and especially in a place like Jackson State, because the big problem for Barack Obama, ain't nobody around him that's ever been poor. They all have trust funds. They all went to Harvard and University of Chicago. And it's Harvard and University of Chicago that are responsible for our problems. Milton Friedman never was poor. His family was a slumlord and ran sweatshops. He didn't give a damn about people. He thought economics was to make the rich richer, and the richer the rich got, the better the world would be. That ain't true. When you're making money and not producing goods, when you're making money and not feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and healing the sick, Jesus said you go to hell. And we got a whole economy going to hell in a handbasket. And the only people that can save this economy are people who know what it has been to be poor. You know what happened to your mama and your grandma. I'm putting you in the dozens. Because by and large, if you forget where you came from and think of where you are now and feel like you're secure, it won't be long before you will be back down. But you're not just going to fall and fail. They're going to find some way to trump up charges against your business and put you in jail. The prison industrial complex has replaced the military industrial complex. And Jim Brown is here talking about that all over Mississippi and working with young offenders whose main problem in school has been that they've been smart. I learned that very early in 3rd grade in Galena C. Jones School, and then I quit. I was playing in the back of the room in Miss Sarah Vokelit's class in 3rd grade with one of the bigger boys, and we were playing mumbly peg with an ice pick. We shouldn't have been doing that. So Miss Vokelit sent us to Miss Fannie C. Williams. She sent us home to get our parents. I came back the next day, got my whipping, got my punishment. The other brother never got back. I didn't even miss him because I was forced to sit in the front of the room now. I didn't see him till I was about to graduate from Howard University, and I was really messing up. I was like the students here, all the students that are here that ought to be here, I was just like them. When anything good went on Howard's campus, it was a cold day, I was home asleep. And I was sleeping through a revolution, but Lincoln, my classmate, had not been back to school for a single day since 3rd grade. And I said, well, where have you been? And he called the names of all of the reform schools and the penitentiaries, and finally he had just gotten out of Angola Penitentiary. And I was about to drop out of Howard because I thought I was going to flunk out. And he sat there by the swimming pool after he'd come in and almost drowned because he was high on heroin. And he lectured me on why I had to be well educated, that I had to get myself together because I had all the opportunities. And he said, I'm smart as you. And he's probably smarter because he had survived Atlanta's penitentiary system. It's getting harder because we're talking about dividing up the money. And that's going to be an even more difficult struggle that's going to require more intellect, more innovation, more access to capital, more partnership, and more prayer and faith. The faith of our fathers and mothers. But I call you to the last verse of Margaret Walker's poem. Let a new earth arise. Let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and strength, a final clenching, be the pulsing in our spirits and our blood. Let the martial songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men and women now arise and take control. She was talking about you.
My instructors. So as we come here today, I will urge you to remember why we came here. Very briefly, I remember the last time that I saw Dr. King, and Mr. Brooks, you were there, out at Edwards, Mississippi, when Dr. King was planning that march that Dr. Lackett talked about from Marks, Mississippi to Washington, D.C. And Dr. King was late coming because there was threats on his life. And he had reached a point where he would not show up at the time that he was supposed to show up. Some individuals were saying, well, who does Martin think he is, keeping us sitting here? So the ones of us stayed there out at Mount Beulah, as they call it. When he finally got there, the meeting pursued. And it was Lawrence Giat that asked him, said, Martin, if I get a welfare mother from Marks, Mississippi, to follow you to Washington, D.C., what can you promise her? Dr. King thought for a few seconds, and he said, Lawrence, I can only promise her hope, so that we can seek who we are. So I am saying to you today, very briefly, and I know these are remarks, that as God told Joshua, after Moses had come and had passed on off of the scene, as Dr. Aaron Henry, Medgar Evers, Dr. King, and others have passed on, we are left here today standing at the Jordan in a position that Joshua was in. And God told Joshua to be strong, be courageous, and have courage, and cross over the Jordan. So I am saying that's where we are today. We are standing at the Jordan, and it is up to us to cross over. So God has given me the courage, the desire, and the ability, and I hope that you would join with me so that we can create an environment here in Mississippi and in America that is going to allow every individual to develop to the maximum of his or her capabilities. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Young, Speaker Clark, President Mason, President Peoples, Dean Dolly Amy Robinson, other distinguished guests, Jackson State family and friends. Let me say first, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Young. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your words that hopefully ring true to all of us, especially our young students who are here today. Over the last couple of days, I've tried to come up with something appropriate to say at this moment, following both your remarks, Ambassador Young, and those of Speaker Clark. Needless to say, I'm both honored and humbled to be in this position. I'm also smart enough not to stay up here very long, so just bear with me for a second. Still, I want to take a moment to remark on a point in time that ties many of us here today together, that has recently, over these last couple of days, thinking about this moment, struck me as more than an auspicious point in time as I've tried to come up with these words. As the year 1968 is one that we all know is seared into the American consciousness. From the torment of what was the Vietnam War, riots across American cities, to the losses of Robert Kennedy and, of course, Dr. King, whose legacy brings us here today. For you, Ambassador Young, and for those dedicated to peace and the uplift of all peoples throughout the world, we all know that April 4th, 1968 was marked by indescribable grief at the loss of your close friend that day at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. No one here needs to be reminded that his murder was a pock upon America. But even his death did not extinguish what is still a guiding light for so many people of this great nation. And in fact, here in Jackson and across the state of Mississippi, 1968 was a year that began to reveal what Dr. King and Medgar Evers and Malcolm X and Vernon Damer and James Chaney and Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner and George Lee and Lamar Smith and Herbert Lee and so many others had made the greatest sacrifice for. Because you see, 1968 as a year in Mississippi was an important year. We heard Dr. Lackey and Representative Clark speak about the Poor People's Campaign and the mule train from Marx. But January 1968 was also the month that the Honorable Robert Clark was inaugurated as the first African American in the Mississippi State House of Representatives since radical Reconstruction. And it was over the next 4 decades that Speaker Clark stood for all that Dr. King had sacrificed so much for. And Speaker Clark fought for those poor people, fought for the people of his district and people throughout this state who had no one else to fight for him. 1968 was also a year in Canton, Mississippi, that Florence Brown Wright became the first black woman elected to any public office in this state since Reconstruction. A few of us were lucky enough to hear Ms. Wright yesterday speak at a Black History Month program in the Alexander Center in Ayer Hall. We were lucky enough to hear her talk about the pride she felt the day that as an elected official she was able to stand there and make sure that her father was able to register to vote for the first time in his life. We were lucky enough to hear her call for a new day of organization, for a renewed commitment from the older generation to bring the young folks who are here, and those who aren't here, who should be here, as Ambassador Young said. A renewed commitment from this older generation to bring this new generation of student activists into the fold of political and social engagement. And I hope that is something that we will all take to heart. But perhaps most importantly for all of us here right now in the Rosie McCoy Auditorium, 1968 was also marked because it was the year that a strong black woman in the English department here at Jackson State University stood at the forefront of a nascent black studies movement and founded the Institute for the Study of the History, Life, and Culture of Black People. Now named in her honor and home to both her academic and artistic legacy, the Margaret Walker Alexander National Research Center for the Study of the 20th Century African American is proud to have you here today, Ambassador Young, And we are wholly committed to your vision of a better world, to redeem the soul of America, as you say. Thank you. I now have the pleasure of introducing Mrs. Frankie Adams Johnson, Chairwoman of the Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, to make a presentation to Ambassador Young.
Good morning. Ambassador Young, could you join me on stage? And I'd like all the veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, if you would join me in making this presentation. Stand, please, as I make this presentation. Ambassador Young, on behalf of the veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, I'm real honored to present to you on behalf of your contribution, your present, past, and all the great contributions that you made to the ongoing struggle for civil rights and human rights here and abroad. So it reads as follows: to Ambassador Andrew Young, a highly respected and honorable veteran of the struggle who is still serving the cause, we salute you as an honorary member of the Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. As Secretary of the Board of the Advisory Board of the Margaret Walker Alexander National Research Center, it is indeed my privilege and pleasure to be here today. I am a graduate of Jackson State University, cum laude, former campus sweetheart, and just pleased as punch to be here with all of these veterans of the civil rights movement. Just as a part of history, my brother, Monzel Stowers, worked alongside of Henry Kirksey to change the form of government for the city of Jackson and help to usher in the legislators that you see in the Mississippi legislature today. Mr. Robert Clark was privileged to be elected before that time on his own merits. I am here today to bring to you some acknowledgments. First of all, we are ever so grateful for former Ambassador Andrew Young being here as our speaker. The Margaret Walker Alexander National Research Center has a history of promoting those activities that highlight and embellish Black people and their lives. If you'll flip to the back of your program, the last page, you will see a continuation of her efforts in the listing of activities that you see. First and foremost on that list, on tomorrow, February the 26th, is Black History Month film series that depicts the untold story of Emmett Till. And of course, that's in the JSU Student Center ballroom, and that's at 12 noon. I won't take up your time to go through the rest of them, but you see what they are, and as your calendars permit, you should attend these activities. You will be enlightened, you will remember, you will be encouraged to make steps to further the civil rights movement and to work in your community to make things better. Also, immediately following this convocation,
we have the Isaac Byrd Luncheon that will be held in the Student Center at Jackson State. That lunch is free and open to the public, and we encourage all of you to come to that event whereby we will honor veterans of the civil rights movement. Those would be Dr. Elsie Dorsey, Dr. Alfredine Harrison, our guest speaker, Ambassador Andrew Young, and Dr. Clarence W. Carter. So stay with us, don't leave. Let's enjoy the mood and the stage that has been set today and honor our own. Please join us.
Good day, everyone. Life, as we all know it, is a compilation of random events and experiences that in turn contributes to who we are destined to become. Just as the caterpillar is destined for beauty, a rather small and yet tangible glimpse of God's majesty, we as a people are destined for greatness. Though greatness, I believe, is certain, getting there on your own, however, is impossible. The man whom we are honoring today once quoted, "Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions of passionate concerns of dedicated individuals." Which means we as a people must be servants of all people, which in essence is the only universal purpose that threads us together in this tapestry called the human race. So, on this great occasion, I challenge each of you in this room to contribute to the upkeep of this tapestry. I ask that you lend a helping hand to someone who is in need. Dedicate a portion of your time and effort to community service projects. Agree to help your fellow classmates succeed rather than just trying to stay ahead. Again, greatness is our destiny, people, but it is worthless if we are the only beneficiary of this reveal. Jackson State University is the very pulse of a community that is in dire need of progress and reconstruction. And we must be the forerunners and the architects that are ready to build upon the blueprints that has already been mapped out by greats such as Dr. Martin Luther King and Margaret Walker Alexander. We must continue to stand for what we believe in and continue to strive towards greatness. And most of all, we must continue to help those help themselves. By doing this, we are not only reaching our destiny, but we're fulfilling our purpose. A purpose in which we all will soon be held accountable for. Thank you.
It's now time for us to adjourn to the Student Center, the new Student Center. Thank you again for coming and sharing this momentous occasion with us.
With a greater reverence. Let us stand with a greater determination. Let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be.
My name is Valita Street, and my title is Doctor of Apostolic Ministry. I'm here visiting Mississippi and doing a meeting, a women's meeting, for 2 days only, on Friday and Saturday. And I believe that God's going to do some great things, and it's indeed an honor to be standing right here at Jackson State University, commemorating the memory of Martin Luther King and the movement and all that has gone on that made it possible, not only for blacks, but for women to be able to be free to speak and do what they've been called to do.
And Dr. Street, you say you're all the way from Dallas, Texas?
Yes, I am. I live in Dallas. I was born and raised there, and I've traveled over many states over time. I was a flight attendant for a while, and even in that I began to learn just a little bit more about the history of where we are and where we're going, and that's what I'm very excited about, to be here today.
And what's the one thing you got from Ambassador Young being here today?
The one thing that I got, I saw a mentor, a historical mentor of wisdom, and no student should have missed it. I wish my own son would have been here, because when you get a legend of that sort, then there's an impartation of wisdom that's priceless. So yes, it was an honor to be with him, get his autograph, and share with you all today.
My name is Sandra White, and I reside here in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm here today to commemorate the 44th celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'm so excited, to be here, to be in the presence of such a great man of God, I believe, Ambassador Andrew Young, and I tell you, the impact that he spoke with such wisdom and such clarity on historical events that took place here in Jackson, Mississippi, and to have him here to speak here on this campus was just that was history making within itself. I do want to say, if I may, one of the things that concerned me was not to have other students here at Jackson State to be a part of this historical event. They should have been here, and I feel like if we can close down the school system for snowy days and for other holidays, how much more should we have not closed down the campus so other kids or students here could have at least had the privilege to make a decision to come here? It was so important. And that's the one thing that kind of grieved me, that the students were not here to partake and hear of Ambassador Young. He said one thing in particular that stood out. He was mentioning a few of the pioneers here in Jackson, Mississippi, and throughout our black culture, and he said some of you students that are here may not even know who these people are, and one of the reasons they don't know is because we as leaders are not presenting the information to them. So how would they know? That's why I feel that they should have been here. The campus should have been closed, and that they should have been here at least to hear a man. You don't pass up an opportunity like this when a man of that stature and great honor comes here. So other than that.
So you say that they should have been here and everything like that. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I found out through one of the students here, one of the leaders, Dr. Jeanette Reed. She told us about it last night, and it was just no question whether or not I would be here or not. It was just a no-brainer to me, and just to know someone of that magnitude is going to be in your area, you if you can be there, you go. And that's why I'm here, and that's why.
So how many more presentations, how many Black History programs do you think we're going to have until the young people and we as a Black race will finally get the message about Dr. King and what Ambassador Young is trying to instill in us?
That's a good question. It remains to be seen. Until change truly do occur, then you will know that the meetings or conferences that you're having, Black conferences, are making an impact, making a difference. And until you see that change, you're going to have to keep having those conferences. So we just keep pressing, just keep having those conferences until it does make a difference. But for right now, we still have a long way to go. I feel like we still have a long way to go.